I never expected Matthew to bring a woman home. At that time, I had just come back from a business trip in the neighboring city. As soon as I opened the door, I saw Matthew pressing a girl onto the sofa. The two of them were pressed tightly together. Matthew's tall figure loomed over her, and the girl's jet black long hair was scattered, forming a sharp contrast with her fair skin. After hearing the sound of the door opening, both of them on the sofa were stunned for a moment. Then the girl opened her mouth in a panic. "Sis, Aurora." I recognized the girl. She was a poor student sponsored by Matthew for many years and had been exceptionally recruited into as just last month. I had objected to it before, but Matthew said, "Grace has no one to rely on in Yencheng. Besides me, who else can help her?" The girl hurriedly straightened her clothes, and Matthew also got up slowly. They must have drunk some wine as the room was filled with a strong smell of alcohol. After a long while, the girl was neatly dressed and stood docilely beside Matthew. Matthew patted her on the cheek and said, "Let the driver take you home." I hadn't heard him speak in such a gentle tone for a long time and was stunned for a moment. The girl nodded gently and said, "Yes, General Manager Matthew." When she left, she quickly glanced at me. She looked like a frightened little white rabbit, which made people feel pity for her. When the sound of the door closing rang out, my heart sank little by little. I don't know how long it had been before Matthew spoke again. "What happened just now was an accident. I drank too much while entertaining clients at noon. It's my fault. It has nothing to do with Grace. Don't make things difficult for her, a little girl." These words were rather harsh, and I unconsciously clenched my hands. But I didn't say anything. I just turned around, took out a folder from my bag, and handed it to him. "Matthew, let's get divorced." I had been preparing the divorce agreement for a long time. I had this idea as early as when he missed our 5th wedding anniversary because of Grace. It was just that the little bit of remaining affection that made me hesitant to make up my mind. "I think it's probably time now." I saw Matthew's face change, and his alcohol-fogged eyes focused. He didn't take it but just looked at me and asked, "Have you thought it through?" I nodded without hesitation and said, "Yes, I have." Matthew's expression was hard to tell whether he was angry or happy, but the slightly furrowed brows somehow revealed some emotions. I ignored it and bent down to pick up a photo frame from the mess on the floor. It was our family photo, which had always been placed right in the middle of the coffee table. I didn't know if it had been thrown away on purpose or if the two of them had been too intense just now. I don't want anything from the Johnson family, but Elena must be mine. June in Yencheng had already entered the rainy season. The sound of raindrops hitting the windows was particularly clear. Under the huge French windows, gusts of wind blew by, and the curtains were swaying and rustling. I walked over and closed the window. Behind me, Matthew asked, "Why?" I didn't say anything and just looked out of the window. Matthew reached out and grasped my wrist. "Is it just because of what happened just now?" He didn't look well, and his brows were full of impatience. "I've already said that I drank too much. Can you stop making a fuss about it?" I didn't move and just let him tighten his fingertips. The pain in my wrist made me even more sober. In 5 years, perhaps this loveless marriage should have ended long ago. It was because I wasn't decisive and brave enough that I had been reluctant to take that step for so long. I went to pack my things, and Matthew followed me in. The small storage room became cramped and crowded because of his intrusion. Matthew looked into my eyes and asked expressionlessly, "Where are you going?" I frowned slightly and said, "Before you sign the divorce agreement, I'll take Elena to stay in a hotel temporarily." He seemed very dissatisfied with my determination, and his dark eyes narrowed. After a while, he said coldly, "I don't agree to the divorce." His words surprised me, and I sneered and asked him back, "Then what do you want?" Matthew was at a loss for words and didn't say anything for a long time. I smiled and put the last thing into the suitcase. I know that marrying me was Grandpa's idea at the beginning. I'm also very grateful that the Johnson family lent a helping hand to me under those circumstances. So in these years, I've done my duty for AS and tried my best to play the role of your wife. If your pride doesn't allow me to be the one who takes the initiative, you can also ask the lawyer to redraft the documents. I don't want anything except Elena. I picked up my luggage and was about to leave when Matthew reached out his hand again, but this time, before he could say anything, Matthew's cell phone rang. General Manager Matthew, I'm home. Grace's soft voice came through the receiver, and Matthew's tense expression immediately relaxed. He withdrew the hand that was blocking my way and leaned lazily against the wall, listening to the voice on the phone and gently saying, You also drank a lot. Go to bed early. You can come to the company a little later tomorrow. Matthew was unusually patient. The person on the other end answered and chattered a few more words. After hanging up the phone, Matthew looked at me again, and his tone was no longer as sharp as before. Where were we just now? The rain outside seemed to be getting heavier, and the wind was blowing violently. The wind and rain were mixed together, and every sound fell on my eardrums. I smiled self-deprecatingly, picked up my luggage, and before he could stop me again, I said, Matthew, a peaceful breakup is different from cheating during marriage. Don't make things so embarrassing. I moved into a hotel near the company with my luggage. After settling down, I drove to pick up Elena. Today was the weekend, and she would always be at the after-school care center. Elena was very happy to see me and rushed into my arms. Mom, you're finally back. Elena missed you so much. The voice of the little baby made my chaotic mood calm down a little. I held her little face and kissed her, and unconsciously a smile appeared on my lips. Mom missed Elena too. I took her to have something to eat. When we got back to the hotel, my cell phone rang as soon as I saw that it was Matthew calling. I ignored it, put it on mute, and threw it aside. Elena blinked her eyes and asked me why I didn't go home. I was at a loss for words and didn't know how to answer. Divorce seems to hurt children even more, but I had no other choice. One can't be trapped in a wrong relationship for a lifetime. One should move forward on the road and look ahead. I had to go to work the next day. Before going to the company, I took Elena to the kindergarten first. When I arrived at the company, I happened to see Grace and stammered, Sister Aurora. In front of others, she always looked timid. To put it nicely, she was shy and reserved. To put it bluntly, she couldn't handle formal occasions. But Matthew was really into her. The rose that I had nurtured with my own hands was held in his palm. Everyone in the company knew that General Manager Matthew treated this new young secretary differently. I gave her a glance and didn't respond. At this time, Matthew came out of his office. He was stunned when he saw me with Grace and then beckoned, Grace, come here. His pampering for her had always been on display. He didn't avoid it even in front of me or in front of other people in the company. Grace blushed and trotted to Matthew's side. Matthew naturally put his arm around her and went into the office. He seemed to glance at me but quickly withdrew his gaze. The door wasn't closed tightly, and I heard his lowered voice, which was gentle and doting. Soon, Grace's charming laughter came from inside. His pampering for her had always been on display. He didn't avoid it even in front of me or in front of other people in the company. Grace blushed and trotted to Matthew's side. Matthew naturally, I ignored him and handed a stack of documents to Matthew. On the top few sheets were the resignation applications that I had printed out. Please sign this as well. But don't worry. I'll wait until after we get divorced to leave the company. Matthew's action of lighting a cigarette paused. Aurora, there should be a limit to throwing tantrums. He didn't look good with his lips pursed into a line. I knew that was a sign of his anger. I'll allow you to stay in a hotel for a few days to calm down. Come back when you've thought it through. His tone seemed like he was bestowing a favor. I felt like laughing a bit, and then I really laughed. Matthew, I'm not throwing a tantrum. I want a divorce, and I'm serious. With a click of the lighter, the flame reignited, and in the curling white smoke, Matthew narrowed his eyes. It seemed that he was trying to figure out whether my words were true or something else. I ignored him and continued, if you don't want a divorce because you're worried about Grandpa, I can talk to him. Don't worry. I won't say anything inappropriate. Matthew was silent for a moment, thinking about something. Soon, he raised his eyes and looked at me again. It's okay, if you want a divorce. I didn't expect him to give in so quickly. I opened my eyes wide, and the complicated emotions in my heart made me want to cry and laugh at the same time, but then, I couldn't laugh anymore. Leave the daughter with me, and I'll sign. I was stunned for a moment and shook my head without hesitation. Elena is mine. There's no way I'll leave her with you. Then we won't get divorced. There's no need to argue. After a short silence, I got emotional. Matthew, how dare you? You're the one who has a mistress outside. You're the one who refuses to divorce. And now you're trying to take my daughter from me. Do you deserve it? My sharp voice was even harsh to my own ears. But Matthew just looked at me, his face as calm as still water. Just because I'm her father and I'm Matthew. You should know that you have no chance of winning if you fight with me for our daughter. In the most casual tone, he said the most heartbreaking words. I looked at him in disbelief and took 2 steps back involuntarily. After 5 years of marriage, I had always known that he wasn't a kind person, but I didn't expect him to go this far. Threatening me with our daughter, how could he do such a thing? In the evening, I went back to the old house, planning to ask Grandpa to make the decision, but was told that the old man had gone abroad for recuperation. The master had been feeling unwell these past few days, so he left earlier this time. The butler, who was always by the old man's side, had always been quite polite to me. In contrast, my mother-in-law, Song Mylan, didn't have such a good attitude. She looked at me disdainfully and said in a sarcastic tone, it's a pity that the old man doted on you so much, yet you didn't even know that he wasn't feeling well. I had been on a business trip for over half a month and indeed, I hadn't called home. I quickly apologized, it's my fault. I'm sorry, Mom. My mother-in-law snorted, clearly not accepting my apology. I felt a bit awkward and regretted coming here. In the 5 years of marriage, my mother-in-law had never been nice to me. Fortunately, she didn't bother to say more to me and turned around and walked upstairs. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then I heard her muttering as she walked, a woman who can't even give birth to a son, what right does she have to be the daughter-in-law of the Johnson family? I really don't know what kind of magic potion she gave the old man to make him let her into the family in the first place. If she still can't give birth to a son, I'll make Matthew replace her. The butler stood not far away, looking at me with pity in his eyes. I forced a smile as usual and thought to myself, what a coincidence. If she could make Matthew agree to the divorce, I would be more than happy. It would save me this wasted trip since I didn't get to see Grandpa on my way back. I was a bit worried. Grandpa usually went abroad for recuperation for 3 to 5 months, sometimes even more than half a year. Although the divorce wasn't urgent at the moment, since I had already moved out of the house, if I didn't make a decision as soon as possible, I had to find a place to live first. I did own some properties, but they were all given by Matthew. Over the years of marriage, our relationship had gradually deteriorated, but he had always been generous to me. However, after all, those were given by him. It didn't seem appropriate for me to live in them at this time. The next day, I found a real estate agency and asked them to help me rent a small apartment. It wasn't far from the company, with a layout of 1 bedroom and 1 living room, just enough for Elena and me to live in. I received a call from Alexander a few days later. On the phone, his voice was gentle as he asked me, Aurora, I'm back in the country. Is it convenient for us to meet? I didn't expect Alexander to call. I was stunned for a moment and then smiled and said, "Let's not meet for now. I've been rather busy recently." There was a pause on the other end. It seemed that he hadn't expected me to refuse so quickly. After a while, his voice came again, "Aurora, are you still blaming me? Alexander and I were childhood sweethearts in name. Before the incident happened to the Brown family back then, we were very close. However, his parents were worried that Alexander would be involved in the affairs of the Brown family, so they sent him abroad immediately and cut off all our connections. At that time, Alexander's mother cried and said to me, 'Aurora, don't blame your uncle and aunt. The matter of the Brown family this time is too serious. We don't have the ability to help you. Take this card. There's some money in it. It can't solve big problems, but it's a token of our kindness.'" I stood still, but my heart grew colder bit by bit. In just a few days after the incident of the Brown family, I witnessed the vicissitudes of human relationships that I hadn't seen in the past 20 years. It was understandable that the Smith family was eager to distance themselves. After all, at a time like this, no one wanted to get into trouble. "No need, Auntie. Since Brother Alexander isn't here, I'll leave first." I stuffed the card back and ran away quickly. The wind whistled past my ears. A car stopped in front of me. I couldn't react in time and fell to the ground. At this time, a figure loomed over me. That was the first time I met Matthew. He was in his early 20s, but he had a calmness and steadiness that didn't match his age. He looked down at me and said faintly, "Grandpa wants to see you." In countless quarrels later, I would always think of that day. He came like a god and had been in my life ever since. Waking up from the memories, I realized that I didn't know when I had shed tears. My throat felt swollen and painful, and my nose was a bit sour. I tried hard to hold back my emotions and forced a smile. "What are you talking about, Brother Alexander? It's been so many years. Those things are long gone. Then let's meet once, Aurora. This weekend, okay?" Alexander was very insistent. I wavered for a moment, but in the end, I still didn't give in. "Sorry, I really don't have time." I thought this matter had come to an end, but unexpectedly, I ran into him a few days later. That day, I had an appointment with a lawyer friend to talk about something. Just as I sat down, someone called me, "Aurora." I didn't expect to meet Alexander here. In just a few years, he had shed his youthfulness and immaturity. He was dressed in a neat suit, which made him look even taller and more upright. He was smiling and looking at me at that time and asked, "Why are you here?" I smiled and said, "I'm talking with a friend about something." Alexander nodded, "Then you go ahead with your business." I watched him leave absent-mindedly and chatted with my friend for a few more sentences. When I went out, I saw him waiting in the parking lot. "I was afraid of disturbing you just now, so I didn't talk much. Is it convenient for you to find a place to sit and chat for a while now?" He seemed determined to talk about something, but I didn't want to say much at all. I didn't blame anyone for what happened back then, but I couldn't accept that there had been no contact at all after he left. I said, "It's not convenient," and turned around to leave. At this time, a black Maybach slowly drove over. It was the latest limited edition last year, and there was only one in the whole Yenching city. Besides Matthew, who else could it be? "Why are you here?" I paused in my steps and looked at the familiar face after the car window was rolled down. Matthew narrowed his eyes, moved his gaze from me to Alexander. I subconsciously took a step aside, wanting to block his line of sight, but he smiled and raised his eyebrows at me. "Get in the car." His voice was very calm, but his tone didn't allow any disobedience. My back stiffened, and I hesitated for a moment. Uncle Samuel, the driver, immediately got out of the car and made a gesture of invitation towards the car door. "Madam, please get in the car." Several gazes fell on me at the same time, as if leaving me no choice. I turned my head and took a look at Alexander, and finally lifted my feet and walked towards Matthew. The air conditioner was on in the car, and the sudden coolness made me shiver instinctively. Just as I was about to speak, Matthew's voice rang out, "Is this the reason why you want a divorce?" I was stunned and couldn't react for a moment. I turned my head and met a pair of cold eyes, which were dark and seemed to weigh heavily on me. "So you haven't gone to the company these days, haven't answered the phone, and have been playing hide and seek with me. It turns out that you've been busy rekindling your old flame with your first love." I hadn't expected Matthew to know about Alexander. After all, I had never mentioned that past, and apart from the two elders of the Smith family, no one outside knew about it. I was a bit shocked and just stood there, not knowing how to react. At this time, Matthew suddenly leaned over and pulled me in front of him. "Speak." His anger came without warning, and I didn't understand what was going on. I struggled to get up, but the man pinned me against his chest with his hand. Matthew frowned unhappily and pinched my chin with his rough fingertips. He was very close to me. The faint smell of tobacco mixed with the fragrance of cologne rushed into my nostrils. I subconsciously turned my face away. "What are you doing?" We hadn't been close for a long time. In the past 2 years, the number of times we met privately could be counted on one hand. Sometimes I also wondered why. After all, at the very beginning, we also had a happy period. Matthew kissed me. It was a chaotic kiss, and his movements were rough, as if he was just venting. I was kissed dizzy and instinctively resisted. The back of the seat sank a lot. The leather seat was icy cold from the cold wind, and that chill reached my heart through my fingertips. "Are you crazy?" I bit down with quite a bit of strength, and the smell of blood spread instantly. Matthew let go of me accordingly, and a streak of bright red dripped from the corner of his mouth. "Like a dog?" He wiped it with his fingertip, but his expression softened a lot. The car drove into Yingshui Lanyuan. I came to my senses belatedly, got up from his arms, frowned and asked, "Who told you to take me home?" Matthew glanced at me, slowly tidying up his clothes. After sitting up straight again, he began to speak casually. "I've been putting up with your tantrums these days, but there should be a limit. Don't you really think that I can't find you? I've never been to Elena's school once." Guess why? Of course, I knew that it would be as easy as turning his hand over for him to find me. In the whole Yanqing city, was there anything that Matthew couldn't do? It's just that he seemed to have forgotten that what I wanted was a divorce, not to play hide and seek with him. "Matthew, I want a divorce. Don't you understand what I'm saying? I've said that Elena belongs to me. You can divorce me if you like." This man was simply unreasonable. And I was burning with anger. I shook off his outstretched hand and my voice involuntarily rose. "There's no lack of women around you. Plenty of women want to have children for you. Why do you have to fight with me for Elena? You know that I have nothing left except her. So just stay by my side obediently. Not only will you have her, but you'll also have me." If he had said such things a few years ago, maybe I would have been moved. But what was the point now? "Okay, since you don't want a peaceful end, then I don't mind filing for divorce." "Yeah, whatever you want." His casual words were enough to break down all the defenses in my heart. That day, I consulted a friend. Even if he was the one at fault, it wouldn't have much impact on the fight for child custody. If I filed for divorce, various factors would be considered comprehensively from the perspective of the children's physical and mental health and their legitimate rights and interests. Obviously, I didn't have the upper hand. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Matthew curled the corners of his mouth and naturally put his arm around my waist. "All right, it's enough after making a fuss. Be good. I won't hold it against you for meeting Alexander. I've already sent someone to pick up Elena. We'll go out for dinner later. Our family hasn't been together for a long time. With the air of a superior, he pulled me inside. I looked at the brand new living room. The sofa from that day had also been replaced with a new one. As if doing this could cover up everything that had happened. More than half a month later, I finally went back to work at the company officially. Brought some documents for me to sign and was extremely happy. Sister Aurora, you're finally back. Was brought up by me. After I left, maybe she would be a good successor. I smiled and joked, what? Did you miss me? Nodded hurriedly and came up to me. She told me a lot of things that had happened recently. When she finally finished talking, it was as if she remembered something. By the way, Sister Aurora, I just saw General Manager Matthew take Grace out again. It's okay. Don't worry about it. I flipped through the documents and signed them one by one. Sat down on the small sofa beside me, looking a bit indignant. That Grace is so shameless. She clearly knows that General Manager Matthew is married, yet she keeps throwing herself at him. But then again, she really looks a bit like you, Sister Aurora. I almost mistook her for you when I saw her in the corridor just now. Kept chattering on. I was stunned for a moment and didn't say anything. It wasn't the first time I'd heard this. When Matthew brought Grace to the company at first, I was also shocked. In the evening when I went to pick up Elena, I accidentally scratched someone else's car. I've always been not very good at driving, and the cars were parked densely near the school. It was the second time this month. I didn't know which unlucky person it was this time. While waiting for the car owner, I saw Alexander coming over. There was a little boy beside him, who sweetly called him uncle. When he saw us, the little boy trotted over, took Elena's hand, and happily called her name. Alexander had an older sister, and this should be her child. Elena also called out, Nyen Nyen, and then asked him, is this your family's car? The little boy nodded, it's my uncle's. There were just so many coincidental things in this world. I awkwardly forced a smile. I'm sorry. I accidentally scratched your car when I just drove out. Do you think we should ask the 4S store to estimate the price, or should I go and repair it for you? The left headlight and a large area beside it were quite seriously scratched. Alexander smiled and said, it's okay. It's not a big deal. I'll go and repair it myself later. I insisted on not agreeing. Alexander's eyes changed, then how about treating us to a meal and we'll forget about this? I didn't expect him to say that and was stunned for a moment. At this time, the two children immediately shouted that they were hungry. In this situation where I couldn't back down, I could only nod. Okay. What would you like to eat? The children chose the dinner by themselves. I didn't have much of an appetite, so I ordered a bowl of vegetable porridge for myself. During the meal, Alexander kept hesitating as if he wanted to say something. It wasn't until we came out of the restaurant that he finally spoke. Aurora, I really had no choice back then. I was always watched by the people sent by my parents abroad and had no chance to escape and come back. It wasn't until you got married that they relaxed their vigilance. Unfortunately, you had already changed your number by then. I couldn't get in touch with you. I could only find out the address of your workplace online and write you letters. I know you can't forgive me, and I don't dare to expect you to forgive me. I just hope that you can give me a chance, even if it's just to be friends, and let me stand by your side again. I was in a daze for a moment. From what he said, I quickly picked up one piece of information. You wrote me letters? Alexander was stunned for a moment and then nodded. I called the switchboard of AS several times, but the calls were all blocked. Since I wanted to get in touch with you, I could only use the most primitive way. I was certain that I hadn't received Alexander's letters. On my way back, I made a phone call to the girl at the front desk. When I asked if she had seen any letters for me a few years ago, there was an obvious pause on the other end of the phone. Soon, the girl smiled and said, "What era is it now? How could anyone write letters?" "I haven't seen any, Manager Win." I sensed that something was wrong but didn't say anything. When I got home, surprisingly, Matthew was there. I was very surprised. But before I could say anything, I heard him ask, "Where have you been? Why are you back so late?" I casually said, "I went out for dinner, but my mood was a bit complicated." Matthew didn't ask any further questions and took our sleeping daughter from my arms. He carried Elena back to her room, and when he came out, he pointed at the table. Only then did I notice that there was a jewelry box on it. "I saw it when I was out today. I thought it would suit you, so I bought it. Try it and see if you like it." He hadn't given me anything for a long time. I was stunned for a moment and didn't move. Seeing this, Matthew picked it up, and soon, a necklace appeared in front of me. "Do you like it? It should be a new style of a certain brand for this season." I had seen it in a magazine before. Was it a buy one get one free gift? Remembering S painting, I asked sarcastically. Matthew was stunned for a moment, and his face instantly darkened. I ignored it and then remembered what Alexander had said, so I asked him, "Have you seen the letters Alexander wrote to me?" I saw Matthew's expression freeze for a moment. Then he grabbed my wrist and asked instead of answering, "Did you meet him again?" His strength was so great that my wrist hurt a little. I didn't shake him off and stared at him without blinking, saying coldly, "You've been hanging out with Grace all day long and even brought her home." "I just met an old friend." "What's the problem?" Matthew's eyes flickered. I thought he was angry and instinctively tensed up. But to my surprise, he just curled his lips and asked with a smile, "What? Are you jealous?" His hot breath fell on me, and I subconsciously shrank back. Matthew laughed wickedly. "Yeah, so what if I took them?" I didn't expect him to admit it so readily. I was stunned instead and then frowned. "Why?" He was still smiling. His face was so close that I could even clearly see my own reflection in his pupils. "Because I wanted to." That was really a good reason. I was a bit speechless and turned to leave. But Matthew pulled me into his arms with a force. His lips slid across my earlobe and landed on my side neck, and the air around us instantly became thin. "Aurora." He called my name in a hoarse voice. "Let me go." My back was stiff, and I instinctively resisted. His warm palm landed on my side waist, but he didn't make any further moves. He held me in his arms, his voice affectionate and gentle. "Don't see him again, okay? I'm begging you." I thought Matthew must have taken the wrong medicine, and I wasn't quite normal either. For a moment, I was in a trance, as if I had gone back to a few years ago. We had had a few happy days back then. At that time, he always liked to hold me like this, and his tone was just as gentle. The next day, before going to work, I went to see my lawyer friend. I handed over all the evidence of Matthew's cheating that I had collected during this period and the description of my financial situation to her. "Help me take a look. Are these pieces of evidence enough? If we go to court, what are my chances of winning?" I had already told her the general situation before. She shook her head vigorously while looking through the photos I had printed. I watched nervously until she put down the materials. "These so-called cheating evidence of yours are not substantial evidence at all. It's just that he's a bit closer to the opposite sex or some gossip on the internet. In court, this kind of thing doesn't even count as peripheral evidence. And in other aspects, the chances of winning aren't big either." Although I had been mentally prepared, I still felt a bit sad after hearing this. Seeing me like this, the other person reached out and held my hand. Don't be too pessimistic. I suggest it's better to start with negotiation. If the negotiation really doesn't work out, it won't be too late to file a lawsuit. During this period, you should also collect more evidence, not just limited to his infidelity in marriage, but also his contribution to the child and other aspects. I understood what she meant and nodded in agreement. It seemed that this matter could only wait until the old man came back. In the evening, Matthew came home on time again, and only then was I sure that he was really acting strangely. Had he quarreled with Grace? But it didn't seem that I had heard anything about it. Dinner was simple noodles. I'm not good at cooking, so usually I would take Elena out to eat. But Matthew didn't want to move and ordered me to cook in a bossy way. I was too lazy to say much to him, and it took me quite a while to finish cooking. 3 steaming bowls of noodles were placed on the dining table. The taste wasn't good, but he ate with great relish. After dinner, I bathed Elena and coaxed her to sleep. As soon as I returned to my room, Matthew followed me in. Where's my pillow? Matthew hadn't spent the night at home for a long time, and I had packed up all his things. I was stunned for a moment and answered truthfully, in the maid's room. Matthew's expression changed. Are you planning to erase all traces of me in this family? I felt a bit guilty and didn't say anything. Matthew went to get the pillow and came back soon. Watching him lie down beside me, I hesitated. We hadn't shared the same bed for too long, and I had already made up my mind to get a divorce. What was going on now? Matthew. I finally opened my mouth and called his name. But Matthew didn't give me a chance to say anything more. He stretched out his long arm and pulled me into his arms. Shut up, or I can't guarantee what I'll do. In fact, he didn't do anything. It was a quiet night, and when we woke up, we were still in each other's arms. I was in a trance for a moment when my cell phone rang. Aurora, I want to go back to our alma mater to have a look today. Do you have time to go with me? It was Alexander's voice. I instantly sobered up. Just as I was about to say something, my phone was taken away from my hand. When I looked up again, Matthew already had it in his hand. In front of me, he said to Alexander, Mr. Alexander, isn't it inappropriate to call someone else's wife early in the morning? The other side seemed to be stunned for a moment, and soon an apology came. Matthew didn't say anything more and hung up directly. I came to my senses only after the cell phone was thrown aside. I frowned and asked him, what are you doing? Matthew closed his eyes again, but his lips were tightly pursed. Breakfast was cooked by the aunt. Matthew didn't say a word while eating. After breakfast, he asked the aunt to take Elena out to play. I wanted to go with them, but I was pulled back. Aurora, let's talk. He pressed me onto the chair, and I looked up blankly. His complexion was very bad, which somehow made me feel a bit flustered. What is it? Just tell me. I managed to stay calm, but he frowned. His deep black eyes stared at me, and I couldn't tell what was on his mind. If you really can't let Alexander go, you can meet him occasionally, but I won't divorce you, definitely not. Although it was an unmistakable tone, I could sense a bit of reluctance in it. I opened my mouth and asked, what do you mean? Matthew took a deep breath and said, it means that I can't control if you have him in your heart, but you must be mine. Do you understand? I was a bit confused and blinked. It seemed that I understood, but also seemed that I didn't. The last Sunday of each month was the fixed day to go back to the old house. It was an unwritten rule of the Johnson family, and it had never been missed in the past 5 years. And this day was undoubtedly a kind of torment for me. It used to be better when Grandpa was at home, as my mother-in-law would restrain herself a bit. But now, as soon as she saw me, she started a new round of nagging. Still no news about having a baby? Did you go to the traditional Chinese doctor I asked you to see before? My friend gave me a folk prescription for having a son. I'll take it to the doctor to have a look later. I had a bit of a headache. Just then, Matthew came in from outside, carrying Elena in his arms. He paused slightly when he saw the situation in front of him and then raised his chin towards me. The dress of our daughter is dirty. Take her upstairs and change it for her. I got up as if I had been pardoned, and the oppressive and suffocating feeling in the air dissipated accordingly. I took my daughter from his arms and gave him a grateful look. I dawdled upstairs for a long time. I bathed Elena, changed her clothes, and combed her hair again. I didn't come downstairs until I couldn't delay any longer. Matthew had gone to the flower hall with Song Mylan. I hesitated for a while before going there. As soon as I got close, I heard Song Mylan's voice. I really don't understand you. Why are you protecting that woman so much? And you even blamed me for scolding her. Our Johnson family has only one male heir in each generation for 3 generations. Do you want it to end with you? I say, you'd better divorce her and marry another one. That little girl from the Song family used to come to our house all the time. I think she's quite good. She has big hips and is easy to bear children. I had heard such words too many times. I was really numb, but also sad. I stopped in my tracks. I really didn't have the courage to go in at this moment, Mom. Matthew's voice was full of helplessness. While I was hesitating, his voice drifted over faintly. What do you mean by that woman? Aurora is my wife. At the very least, you should give her the respect she deserves. And I've told you many times that I have no intention of getting divorced. These words were the same as what he had said to me, but to Song Mylan, it was undoubtedly adding fuel to the fire. After a moment of silence, Song Mylan's tone suddenly rose, and her voice became louder. What do you mean by having no intention of getting divorced? What if she can't give birth to a son? I say, we shouldn't have listened to you in the first place. You insisted on marrying her. There are so many nice girls in Yenching. Why were you so blind and chose her? Song Mylan was still chattering on, but my mind was a bit muddled. Wasn't our marriage arranged by Grandpa? Why did it sound like it was Matthew's own choice from what my mother-in-law said? On the way back, I was still thinking about their conversation, so much so that I didn't even hear Matthew calling me. Finally, it was Elena who climbed to my side and pulled my hand. Mom, Dad is talking to you. I snapped back to my senses and met Matthew's puzzled look. I blurted out, Matthew, why did you marry me in the first place? Actually, I had always had a lot of doubts in my heart during these years when our relationship was not good. I had attributed it to the fact that he didn't love me and that marrying me was not his true intention. But if that wasn't the case, what was the reason that I didn't know? Matthew's expression was hesitant, which I had never seen before. He looked at me and hesitated several times before speaking. When he opened his mouth again, I felt my heart tighten. But just at this moment, a sudden cell phone ringtone broke the silence. The call was from Grace. Looking at the name on the screen, my mood instantly sank. For a moment, I felt how ridiculous I was. I actually had the thought that Matthew married me because he liked me just because of my mother-in-law's words. It was extremely ridiculous. Grace's voice was choked with sobs as she asked Matthew for help. General Manager Matthew, I was hit by someone. I'm in the hospital now. Could you please come here? I'm so scared. I remembered that time before, on the 5th wedding anniversary. To ease our relationship, I had specially prepared a surprise. But that day, Matthew was held up by Grace and didn't show up all night. Matthew frowned and asked, what happened? Grace rambled on for a while. Before she could finish, I picked up Elena and said, Uncle Samuel, could you please stop in front for a moment? I'll take Elena to buy something. Uncle Samuel looked through the rearview mirror. Matthew didn't say anything. I frowned and looked at him impatiently. What? Do you plan to take me and Elena to the hospital? The voice on the other end of the phone became more and more pitiful, but Matthew remained silent. My patience was almost at its limit. Just as I was about to speak, Matthew finally said, "If you're not feeling well, go to the doctor." What do you want me to do? With that, not only I, but also the other end of the phone fell silent instantly. There was dead silence. Mid-August was the 6th wedding anniversary of ours. Matthew didn't mention it as usual. I didn't want to do anything pointless either, so I just treated it as an ordinary day. Who would have thought that he suddenly came home in the middle of the night and hugged me tightly? He had been drinking and was very strong, as if he wanted to merge me into his body. I struggled uncomfortably, but in return, the man held me even tighter. "Aurora," he called my name, "don't even think about leaving me. You're mine, you're Matthew's." In a daze, I remembered our first wedding anniversary. It was the first and also the last anniversary that we spent together. He also drank too much that night, and I drank even more than he did. But when I think about it now, I always feel that there are some missing parts in my memory. I don't remember what happened later. However, since that day, Matthew seemed to have become a different person. Grandpa came back after taking a 2-month rest. As soon as I got the news, I rushed to the old house immediately. Grandpa was very happy to see me. After having a meal together, he asked me to go to the study. "Your mother said you came to see me before. Was there anything you wanted to talk about?" Grandpa asked me with his usual kind look and a smile. Thinking of all the past events, I hesitated for a moment. After thinking for a while, I shook my head and said, "No, nothing." Grandpa definitely didn't believe me and just looked at me. I quickly looked away, and then I heard Grandpa ask, "Did that Matthew bully you again?" Over the years, the fact that Matthew and I were just putting on a show of harmony in public might not be known to outsiders, but Grandpa couldn't have failed to notice it. I was at a loss for words and just choked on my words. Seeing this, Grandpa couldn't help sighing. "I don't even know now whether it was right or wrong to let you two get married back then. I don't know if your father's spirit in heaven will blame me." Father had accidentally saved Grandpa's life once. So when he learned that the Brown family was in trouble later, Grandpa offered his help. Over the years, he had treated me like his own granddaughter. He always said that without my father, there would be no him now. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. It's our fault for not handling our relationship well and making you worried." Grandpa shook his head and didn't say any reproachful words. Instead, he lowered his head and took out a key from the drawer. "What's this?" I thought it looked familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had seen it for a moment. Grandpa pushed the key in front of me. The key to the old house of the Brown family. "How come you can't recognize it?" When I went for convalescence this time, Matthew asked me to find the owner. After the accident in the Brown family, the old house was auctioned off. It changed hands between two families later and was finally bought by a family surnamed Jiang. I had inquired about it before. That family had always been abroad. I didn't expect Matthew would ask Grandpa to buy it on his behalf. Grace came to find me, and then I learned that she had been dismissed. Elena had caught a cold these days, and I had been taking care of her at home. Grace's eyes were red and swollen, and it was obvious that she was very sad. I frowned and asked her, why? The Johnson family had been sponsoring her since she was 10 years old and had continued for more than 10 years. Of course she wasn't the only child being sponsored, but she was the first one who came to find us after growing up. General Manager Matthew said that I was restless. But Sister Aurora, I just like him. Is that wrong? Matthew hadn't been in good health since he was born, so Grandpa had always done good deeds in Matthew's name. So not long after Matthew took over AS, Grace came to find him. She said that she recognized his name from the media and immediately knew that he was the benefactor who had helped her get out of that small mountain village. I can't judge your affairs. If you don't want to leave, you can talk to him. It's useless to tell me. The nanny came downstairs and told me that Elena had woken up and was crying for her mother. I looked at Grace indifferently and gave her the order to leave. I still have things to do. If there's nothing else, Miss Grace, please go back. Grace also stood up, but she didn't leave immediately. She looked at me and sized me up from head to toe. After a long while she gave a light laugh and said, "All right, then I'll take my leave first." I didn't take this matter to heart. Elena had a recurring fever and I was extremely worried. In the afternoon I took her to the hospital. It was not easy to get her fever down, and finally I could put my heart back in my chest. At the end of the month I went to the old house of the Brown family. After getting the key from Grandpa, I hired someone to redesign it and planned to restore it to its original state. After chatting with the workers, I drove away. When I was halfway there, a car overtook me from the side. I quickly stepped on the brakes and both cars stopped at the same time. The person inside the other car got out and walked straight towards me. "I'm sorry. I was distracted just now." I also opened the car door and was just about to check if the cars had scratched each other when a strange fragrance hit me. Then everything went black and I passed out. When I woke up again, I was in an enclosed space. It was pitch black around me and only a few scattered rays of light shone from above, barely visible. "Is anyone there?" I called out uneasily. At this time, there was a rustling sound not far away. I subconsciously moved back until the voice said, "Aurora?" I was stunned. I didn't expect it to be Alexander. Just as I was about to say something else, a strange feeling came over me. "Brother Alexander? I think I've been drugged. I'm not a naive little girl who knows nothing." That feeling came clearly and suddenly. I just felt a burning sensation in my lower abdomen and even my heart started to feel restless. "What?" Alexander quickly approached, which scared me and made me keep backing away. Wave after wave of sensations hit me and I knew something bad was going to happen. "Where's your cell phone?" "I don't have it with me." I groped for the door by the faint light. It seemed that this was a warehouse, surrounded by iron sheets. I didn't know what was going on outside, so I could only shout with all my strength, "Help! Is anyone there?" I was very uneasy and more than that, I felt physically uncomfortable. I had never taken that kind of drug before, but I had heard of it more or less. If I didn't get out as soon as possible while I could still control myself, I didn't dare to imagine what the consequences would be. Don't waste your energy. There are no households within a 5-kilometer radius here. No one will come to save you. The familiar voice was no longer as gentle and soft as before. I was stunned and then realized that there was a meaningful look in her eyes that day. "Grace, what do you want to do?" I was shaking violently and my voice was a bit broken. Grace smiled and said, "I want you to have sex with him. Now, right now, immediately." I didn't expect her to say such a thing and blurted out, "Why?" Then the light above was turned on and the sudden brightness made me subconsciously narrow my eyes. In the blink of an eye, the camera on the wall turned around along with it. "Because I want Matthew to see with his own eyes how affectionate you are with your first love, so that he'll finally give up." "Are you crazy, Grace? What nonsense are you talking about?" "I'm not crazy. It's him who's crazy. He heard you calling another man's name when you were drunk, yet he still wouldn't let you go. I'm really curious. When he sees you sleeping with another man, I wonder if he'll still be so persistent." I couldn't quite hear the words that followed clearly. The wind howled past and something seemed to explode in my ears. At that instant, many things became clear. By the time Matthew rushed over in a hurry, the blood on his fingertips had already started to dry up. When Grace was going wild with glee, I picked up a stone from the corner and made a deep cut on my fingertip. I remembered seeing in a video before that if someone was drugged, they could induce vomiting or use pain to stimulate themselves. The effect of the drug had already kicked in and it was obviously too late to induce vomiting. So I had to be really hard on myself. Fortunately, it worked. The bright red blood flowed all over the floor and that uncomfortable feeling finally eased. "Are you feeling better?" Alexander's voice sounded a bit bitter. He was not far from me, looking at me with a complicated expression. I nodded. I should be okay. At that moment, the door of the warehouse was opened. Grace probably saw the situation inside through the surveillance and wanted someone to give us 2 more pills. Then the sound of an engine roared and soon Matthew appeared at the entrance of the warehouse. General Manager Matthew. Grace's voice was shaking. "Why are you here so soon?" Matthew gave her a cold glance and then strode up to me. The blood on his hand had dried, but the pain was still there. I looked up at him and before I could say anything, tears started streaming down my face. "Matthew." I was hugged tightly. Matthew was shaking, but the strength with which he held me was great. I was pressed so hard that I could hardly breathe. Finally, Alexander spoke up to persuade him, "Send Aurora to the hospital first. She's been drugged." Matthew let go of me and I quickly forced a smile. Remembering what Grace had said just now, I thought it was necessary to explain clearly in front of the 2 people involved. On our first wedding anniversary, when I was drunk, did I call Alexander's name? I saw that both men were stunned. But like me, Alexander's eyes were also fixed on Matthew. We were all waiting for his answer, and when he nodded with difficulty, Alexander suddenly looked at me, "Aurora." His voice was the same as when he heard Grace's words before. I knew he must have misunderstood. I quickly explained, "It's not what you think." Then I told them exactly what had happened that day. Because Alexander's mother came to see me that day, and I was a bit shocked, so I called his name. "Actually, Matthew, I married you willingly." There was complete silence. There was one thing I had never said before. The first time I saw Matthew, my heart started beating wildly, something that had never happened before. I knew it was love at first sight. Matthew hugged me tightly again, and something cold fell on the back of my neck. He said, "I should have asked you. We shouldn't have been estranged for so many years because of this misunderstanding." Yes, how pitiful it was that 2 people in love had been estranged for so many years because of a misunderstanding. It doesn't matter. It's not too late now that we know the truth. I hugged him back, but at that moment, a figure rushed out. Sometimes danger comes in an instant. When the knife was stabbed at me, I froze on the spot. But the expected pain didn't come. Instead, Matthew's limp body slumped into my arms. Blood flowed all over the floor, wetting my hands. After a brief moment of shock, I shouted in panic, "Ambulance. Call an ambulance quickly." Matthew was in a coma for 2 days before he woke up. Although he wasn't hurt in vital parts, he had lost a lot of blood. The whole family stayed by his hospital bed. My mother-in-law rushed over at once. "How are you, Matthew? Are you feeling uncomfortable anywhere? I'll go find the doctor. Don't talk for now." My mother-in-law rushed out in a hurry. Matthew reached out his hand towards me. I hesitated for a moment and then walked over. The moment our fingers intertwined, a smile appeared on Matthew's pale face. Grace was arrested for intentional injury. Matthew and I both went to the court hearing. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, and there was no appeal. But when she was being taken away, she asked to see Matthew, and Matthew refused. I have nothing to say to her. All these years of support were just wasted. The person took the message away. I wondered what Grace's reaction would be after hearing it. I felt a bit melancholy, and then my hand was held by Matthew again. Aurora. He called my name. I looked at him. Although some things are already in the past, I still want to explain to you. After all, just one misunderstanding made us estranged for so many years. I don't want it to happen a second time. I didn't say anything and just looked at his good-looking eyebrows and eyes. After all these years, it seemed that he was still the same as before. The day you came back from your business trip, I really drank too much. When Grace threw herself at me, I was a bit dazed. I didn't expect that you happened to come back at that time, and then you saw that scene. Then what about you and her? I have nothing to do with her. I just felt sorry for her, and she's quite like you. Actually, when Grace grabbed me, I had guessed that she must have unrequited love for Matthew. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone crazy like this. I just didn't understand. She had managed to get out of her hometown with great difficulty. How could she let herself walk down a road of no return? When Alexander came to see me, I met him. I felt really sorry that he had been innocently involved in that incident. But he just smiled and told me it was okay. Over the years, I've always regretted not being by your side when you needed me years ago. So I really wanted to do something for you. That this incident could help you and Mr. Zhou make up is also the fulfillment of my wish for so many years. Matthew came downstairs from the second floor and smiled when he heard this. In front of me, he reached out his hand towards Alexander and said solemnly, "I'm really sorry about the letter, Mr. Alexander. I apologize." The two hands clasped together. I was behind them, looking at the two of them. After 7 years, everything was settled at this moment. The past is gone, and the future is yet to come. I think we will all be happy.